An American man walked away from a life of wealth, sold everything he owned, and moved his family to a remote village in China. But why? He didn't come to make money. He wasn't looking for a fresh start. He came to honor a promise, a debt of gratitude that had changed the course of his life. What kept him in this place for the past 20 years? What made his story so extraordinary? Stay with us until the end of this video to uncover the incredible journey behind his life-changing decision. If you ever find yourself wandering the streets of Xizhou, Yunnan, you might come across an elderly man who stands out from the crowd. He walks with a lively stride, his shoulder-length hair swaying as he moves. He greets every passerby with warmth, his face always lit up by a beaming smile, one that makes the deep lines on his skin look even more welcoming. His name is Linden, an American, the owner of the prestigious Linden Center, and perhaps the most well-known figure in town. Everyone in the village knows him. Whether it's a neighborhood dispute, a wedding, or even a funeral, Brian is always there. People from miles around affectionately call him Lao Lin, Old Lin. In 2004, Brian Linden gave up his comfortable life in America. He sold his home, packed up his wife and children, and moved to Xizhou. In the blink of an eye, nearly 2 decades have passed. But Linden's connection to China runs far deeper than just this village. In fact, China once changed the course of his life entirely. Later, he made a decision to dedicate the rest of his life to repaying that kindness. This extraordinary journey began 40 years ago. Before China, Brian Linden was just a poor kid from Chicago. His family was as ordinary as they come. His father was illiterate. His mother never finished high school. They worked the lowest-paying jobs just to survive. At 15, Linden had no choice but to help support his family. He worked while attending school, spending more time washing dishes in a bar than sitting in a classroom. After high school, he enrolled in a low-cost community college while running a small carpet cleaning business. Each time he got a job, he would hop into his pickup truck, dragging a 60-kilogram machine behind him, driving all across Chicago to make a living. People often talk about the American dream as if it were within reach for everyone, but Linden knew better. For someone like him, dreaming felt like a luxury he simply couldn't afford. Then, one day in 1983, fate intervened. A University of Chicago professor hired him to clean his carpets. Linden had no idea that this man was about to change his life forever. In the center of the professor's home hung a world map. Each time he visited a new country, he pinned a tiny flag onto it. When Linden arrived, the professor excitedly told him he had just returned from China and asked for a favor. "Once you're done, can you help me pin this flag onto China?" Linden froze. He had no idea where China was on the map. As he scrubbed the carpets, sweat formed on his brow, not just from the labor, but from sheer embarrassment. The professor noticed his hesitation, smiled, and pinned the flag for him. Then, he turned to Linden and asked, "Do you plan to spend your whole life just cleaning carpets?" Linden laughed nervously. "Of course not." "Then what else do you think you can do?" Linden hesitated. For a kid like him in America, was there even another option? The professor saw the frustration in Linden's eyes. He paused for a moment, then offered a simple yet profound piece of advice. Life is too short. You need to open your eyes to the world. If you can't find your dream in America, why not look for it somewhere else? For the first time, someone had challenged Linden's perception of the world. That day, as he walked home, he couldn't shake the professor's words from his mind. He found himself thinking about something he had never considered before. 2 weeks later, outside the night school where he was taking classes, a poster caught his eye. It announced that the Chinese government was offering scholarships for international students. His heart skipped a beat. Was this the China the professor had mentioned? Could this be fate? Without hesitation, he sat down and wrote a letter to the Chinese embassy. In it, he shared his story, his humble background, his failed pursuit of the American dream, and his deep desire to study in China. He sent the letter, hoping but not expecting too much. After all, he had no special qualifications. Then, 3 months later, something unexpected happened. Linden received a call from the Chinese embassy. He had been accepted into a university in Beijing, and not only that, but the Chinese government had granted him a full scholarship. Overjoyed, he asked the person on the other end of the line, "Why me? Was I the only one who applied?" The person chuckled and replied, because you needed it the most. In August 1984, at just 22 years old, Linden embarked on his journey to China. Until then, he had never even left Chicago. Now he was stepping into an unfamiliar world, a land shrouded in mystery, one that held a future he couldn't yet imagine. What he didn't realize was that China was in the early days of its reform and opening up. And without knowing it, he had become one of the first Western exchange students to study in Beijing since the founding of the People's Republic of China. Materially, China at the time couldn't compare to America. But in this land, Linden found something he had never experienced before. Hope, friend, you, and me. Those were the only Chinese words he knew when he arrived. Where is the bathroom? That was the first phrase he had to learn because, well, nature calls. Like any eager language learner, he carried small flashcards everywhere, scribbling down new words whenever he had a moment. At night, he would adjust the antenna on his radio, desperately trying to catch a signal, struggling to listen through the static, word by word. Of course, he needed a Chinese name. His surname, Linden, when phonetically translated, became Linden. But it wasn't just a direct translation. It carried a deeper meaning. His teacher explained, Linden means one who climbs through a vast forest. Whether by coincidence or fate, the name seemed to predict his destiny, because from that moment on, Linden would constantly face challenges and rise to new heights. Linden's experiences in China were nothing short of extraordinary. On just his second day in Beijing, he received a surprising invitation. The director of Beijing Film Studio wanted him to be in a movie. Sitting in a luxury imported Mercedes, he felt as if he had stepped into a dream. He had no idea whether the man next to him was a film executive or a historical figure like Wu Zetian, Kangxi, or Qin Shi Huang. All he knew was one thing. This was someone important. The film Linden starred in told the story of a young American student studying abroad in China. In many ways, he was playing himself. Since he didn't speak Chinese, he had to memorize his lines mechanically on set, only for someone else to dub over his voice later. It was an uncomfortable experience. But the most awkward part? His salary for the film was $200, the equivalent of a full year's wages for the average Chinese worker at the time. Linden felt he hadn't earned it. Yet this brief acting experience led to an even greater opportunity. His appearance caught the attention of CBS, the American television network, which soon invited him for an interview. From that moment on, he officially became CBS's China-based correspondent. The salary CBS offered was more than what his father had earned in a lifetime. This new job opened doors to invaluable experiences, giving him a front-row seat to one of the most transformative periods in modern China, the country's rapid economic reform and opening up. To truly understand China, Linden traveled extensively. He visited every major city and ventured deep into remote villages. At the time, China's tourism industry was still in its infancy. For a foreigner to leave Beijing and travel freely, multiple approvals were required. And in small towns and rural villages, a foreigner was a rare sight. Every journey felt like an adventure. But those experiences allowed him to see a China beyond the narratives of mainstream Western media, a country far more complex and rich than the world had been led to believe. In 1987, Linden enrolled in graduate school at Nanjing University. There, he met the woman who would change his life forever, Ginny. Ginny was a Chinese American with a deep appreciation for Chinese culture and architecture. Their connection was instant. They could talk for hours, completely absorbed in conversations about their shared passions. Not long after, they were married. From that point on, Linden's journey was no longer his alone. It became their journey together. They traveled across China, from north to south, exploring new places, embracing new stories, and deepening their love for the country. After completing his studies, Linden and Ginny returned to the U.S. He pursued a PhD in East Asian history at Stanford University, secured a prestigious job, and stepped into what many would call the elite world. Outside of work, he traveled extensively, setting foot in over 100 countries and territories, meeting people from all walks of life, immersing himself in different cultures. But one thing broke his heart and infuriated him. The way the world viewed China was shallow, biased, and often completely misinformed. Determined to change this, he and Ginny opened an art gallery showcasing Chinese art and culture. They hoped that through art, they could bridge the gap between China and the Western world. But no matter how much they explained, they couldn't fight the tidal wave of misinformation perpetuated by Western media. their efforts felt futile. Then, in 2004, Linden and Ginny made a radical decision. They sold everything they owned in the US and moved back to China for good. To Linden, China was more than just a country. It was the land that had shaped him, nurtured him, and transformed his destiny. And just like a child who couldn't bear to see his parents misunderstood and slandered, he couldn't stand by and let the world misrepresent the place he called home. So, they set out on a journey across China, searching for a place to settle down. After traveling far and wide, they finally found it, Xizhou, Yunnan, the place that would become their second home. Nestled between Erhai Lake to the east and Kangshan Mountains to the west, Xizhou is a place of breathtaking beauty, a land where nature and tradition exist in perfect harmony, a place untouched by time, pure and unspoiled. Home to 26 different ethnic groups, it is a land that embraces diversity with quiet grace, ancient yet welcoming, rustic yet rich in history. When Linden and his wife arrived, no one treated them as outsiders. Occasionally, curious locals would ask, "Which ethnic group do you belong to?" With a playful smile, Linden would reply, "We are the 27th, the American ethnic group." At that moment, he had no idea that this land would become his home for the next 20 years. And for 2 decades, he dedicated himself to one mission, telling the real story of China. The moment Linden laid eyes on the Yang family mansion, fate had already made its choice. Built in 1947 by Yang Pin-hung, a wealthy merchant of the Republic of China era, the estate was a masterpiece of Bai architecture, elegant in design yet commanding in presence. Linden was captivated at first sight. Determined to restore the mansion to its former glory, he leased the property and embarked on an ambitious restoration project. He hired over 100 local craftsmen and spent 18 months meticulously repairing every detail, ensuring that its original beauty remained untouched. His goal was simple. I hoped that if Yang Pin-hang were to return one day, he wouldn't feel like anything had changed. The 16 chambers of the estate were transformed into a boutique guest house, one that would later be known as the Linden Center. A century-old Bai estate, once a symbol of prosperity, now stood tall again, its intricate carvings, sloping tiled roofs, and stately courtyards restored to their original splendor. But Linden's vision extended beyond business. The Linden Center was never meant to be just a luxury retreat. Instead, he dreamed of it as a cultural bridge, a living, breathing museum of heritage and tradition. For Linden, welcoming foreign guests was never just about providing a place to stay, it was about connecting them to the soul of Xizhou. Every visitor who stepped into the Linden Center was not just a guest, they became a part of the community. With Linden as their guide, they would wander through the bustling morning markets, learn the delicate art of traditional tea brewing, forage for wild mushrooms in the forest, discover the ancient craft of indigo dyeing, take part in local festivals alongside the villagers. Linden always said, "I didn't come to Xizhou to change or modernize it. I came to help preserve its traditions." Even when American government officials visited Xizhou, Linden didn't take them to luxury hotels or formal diplomatic meetings. Instead, he led them into the heart of the village. He brought them to a roadside barber shop where a haircut cost just 3 yuan. He introduced them to local farmers, artisans, and shopkeepers, allowing them to witness the real China, not just the version portrayed by Western media. For Linden, the greatest soft power of China isn't its economy or politics, it's the culture of its people. Linden understood one fundamental truth. Education has the power to change destinies. After all, his own life had been transformed by education. This belief led him to establish free classes at the Linden Center, providing local children with access to knowledge and opportunity. But he didn't stop there. To foster genuine cultural exchange, he partnered with prestigious schools in the United States, inviting American students to Xizhou for a 5-month immersive cultural program. Among them, students from the same school attended by Malia and Sasha Obama, the daughters of former U.S. President Barack Obama. These children, as they grow up, may one day become leaders, innovators, and visionaries, perhaps even the future decision-makers of the United States. And their time spent studying in Xizhou? It gave them a chance to experience the real China. Not the one portrayed in Western media, but the one that thrives beyond headlines, in the heart of its people. Today, the Linden Center operates just 3 branches. Despite its high room rates, The cost of maintaining such a historic estate is immense, leaving little to no profit. As its reputation grew, wealthy investors stepped forward, eager to expand the business. One even offered Linden a Land Rover as a gift, hoping to convince him to turn the model into a large-scale hotel chain. But Linden firmly refused, because for him, this was never about money. It was his unwavering commitment that made the Linden Center a cultural landmark, not just another luxury brand. In 2011, the estate was designated a National Cultural Heritage Site. Since 2008, nearly 200,000 visitors, including tourists and global media outlets, have stepped through its doors. Linden takes great pride in what he has built. Recently, Linden celebrated his 60th birthday in Xizhou. Looking back, he realized that most of his life had been intertwined with China. 2 decades had passed, and his family had become true Xizhou locals. They shopped at the morning markets, sipped tea with neighbors, stopped by roadside barbershops. The simple, everyday rhythms of life had become their own. Linden had seamlessly woven himself into the fabric of the village. And if he wasn't at the Linden Center, you might find him. Working in the fields with farmers, pulling up a chair on the roadside to teach English to local kids, fixing a neighbor's water pipes, only to stay for dinner afterward. Village Chief Lin, come over for dinner tonight. Lao Lin, I just picked some fresh wild mushrooms for you. In Xizhou, his name was as well known as any celebrity's. But to the people, Linden and Ginny weren't just foreigners. They were a perfect pair, partners in every sense. Together, they restored history. Together, they preserved culture. Together, they built a life rooted in love and purpose. Whenever they had free time, Linden and Ginny would take long walks with their dogs along the village roads. They hiked up mountains to watch the snow, the stars, and the moon. They sat quietly, waiting for the sunrise and sunset to paint the sky. They still loved traveling, just like they did in their youth. Only now, their journeys were no longer just for 2, but for 4. They took their children across China, retracing the very paths they had once walked, passing down not just their love for this land, but their deep connection to it, back to where it all began. A single opportunity and a scholarship had changed the fate of a poor boy with no future. And today, a burning passion and a lifelong devotion had transformed an old man with silver hair into someone who spent his life giving back to the land that raised him. Linden once said, I, Linden, promise the people of China that for as long as I live, I will tell the most honest story of this country. It turns out, in this world, there truly are people this remarkable, this genuine, this full of love. Linden's journey is more than just one man's story. It is a testament to the power of gratitude, connection, and cultural understanding. From a young man with no future to someone who dedicated his life to honoring the place that changed his destiny, he proved that love and gratitude know no borders. What do you think about Linden's journey? If given the chance, would you leave everything behind to start a new life in a foreign land, just like he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more incredible stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.